and welcome. This is a workshop that we're offering today on healthy relationships and intimate partner violence. This workshop is specifically for men who work with youth in New Orleans. The idea is to raise awareness about intimate partner violence and what healthy and unhealthy relationships look like and abuse, specifically for men who are coaches, who are teachers, who are mentors, or just concerned citizens and care about our youth. This is a collaboration between the Institute of Women and Ethnic Studies and the New Orleans Family Justice Center. It's called the MORE Project, and really the overall goals of the project are to improve public health in New Orleans and reduce intimate partner violence, prevent it. So here are your presenters for the day. You'll see our faces probably at the very end, but here are our pictures and you'll hear our voices throughout this presentation. My name is Eva Lessinger. I'm the Director of Programs at the New Orleans Family Justice Center, and I'll let my coworkers introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Sharon Henry, the Director of Community Outreach and Prevention here at the New Orleans Family Justice Center.
Hello, I'm Coach Al Jones, and I am the Teen Violence Prevention Coordinator at the New Orleans Family Justice Center. And I want to thank you all for listening in.
And you'll get our information at the end if you want to reach out to any of us individually. So here's our agenda for today. Again, thank you for spending your time with us and thank you for what you do in the community. We've split it up into 3 parts. So the first part, we're going to be talking about the scope of the problem, really the scope of violence nationally and in our community, kind of to ground into why we're here, why this is such a big issue, and also why we are specifically targeting men who work with youth. The second part of the training is really to dig into the definitions of intimate partner violence, to help you understand the dynamics and what to look for. And then lastly, we wanted to give you some skills in terms of preventing and intervening when you can with your youth. We wanted to leave you with some ideas and some examples, some scenarios for what that might help you think about ways that you can intervene. So just a few reminders before we get going. This is really just a 101 introduction. It's not meant to be comprehensive or cover all of the topics that we could cover. It's really just to give you kind of an overview, and we will definitely have more opportunities for training in the future. And we really hope you can join us to kind of dig deeper and go deeper. And most of our trainings are interactive, and we can kind of have more discussion and debate. Obviously, this is just a presentation, so hopefully you'll still learn something that you hadn't known before, which brings me to my second point, which is just to stay open, right? You might hear some information that you've never heard or that you don't agree with or you think should be presented differently, and I just ask that you keep your heart and your mind open to considering different viewpoints. And lastly, of course, it is a really tough topic. It's something that touches all of us in one way, shape, or form. Either we've been through something ourselves, or we watch someone that we love go through it. It's a tough topic, and it's a heavy topic. So that brings me to one more reminder from Coach Jones.
I want you to remember, take care of yourselves. You want to breathe, take a break when necessary, drink plenty of water and eat a snack and take notes and journal thoughts. In addition to that, I want you to just understand this is good information. And as a reputation, we have as men, we don't like to see the doctor. We don't like going to the doctor. I want to encourage you when you can, see your doctor as often as possible. With that in mind, let's continue.
Why we are here. It is very prevalent in the United States that 1 in 3 women, 1 in 14 men, 1 in 2 bisexual women, 1 in 2 transgender individuals will experience IPV and/or sexual violence in their lifetime.
It all just starts in youth. 1 in 3 adolescents in the US is a victim of physical, sexual, emotional, or verbal abuse from a dating partner. A figure that far exceeds rates of other types of youth violence. 1 in 10 high school students have been purposely hit, slapped, or physically hurt by a boyfriend or a girlfriend.
And it is made known Girls and young women between the ages of 16 and 24 experience the highest rate of intimate partner violence, almost triple the national average. Being physically or sexually abused makes teen girls 6 times more likely to become pregnant and twice as likely to get an STI. An estimated 32,000 pregnancies result from rape every year.
50% who have been victims of both dating violence and rape attempt suicide, compared to 12.5% of non-abused girls and 5.4% of non-abused boys. 81% of parents believe teen dating violence is not an issue or admit they don't know if it's an issue at all.
And one of the things that we really try to focus on is pregnancy. So across the nation, 1 in 6 pregnant women are abused by their intimate partner. It's a huge statistic. And statewide, there were some recent studies that showed in Louisiana that pregnant women are more likely to die by homicide than by any other one obstetric cause. So that's like a health-related or pregnancy-related cause. Homicide was more likely than any one of those causes. So it's a huge issue, particularly in Louisiana. So it also remains really, really underreported. Only about 30% of folks who experience intimate partner violence actually report it to authorities. So the vast majority, about 2/3, it's never even reported. It comes to the light, and sexual violence is even less so. Depending on the demographic, somewhere between about 10% and 25% gets actually reported. I think the 10% is in college students or college age students, which is a really, unfortunately, there's a high rate of sexual violence in that age period. But it's reported at only about 10%. So 90% of sexual violence in that time doesn't get reported. And only about 1/3, again, of teens who were in a violent relationship ever told anyone about the abuse. So most of the adults never even knew that they were in a violent relationship.
We average here in our metropolitan area 15,000 approximately number of calls, domestic violence calls, to our New Orleans Police Department each year. There are 900 approximately calls to NOPD, Adult Sex Crimes Unit, each year, and 3,000 calls, victims served by New Orleans Family Justice Center each year. Here in New Orleans, the New Orleans Family Justice Center is known as the one-stop shop for victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, and human trafficking and stalking. And last but certainly not least, as of the year of 2020, Louisiana is ranking number 5 for women killed by men. The lifetime economic costs associated with medical services for intimate partner violence related injuries, lost productivity from paid work, criminal justice, and other costs for the United States is $3.6 trillion.
I want to bring your attention to, we hear about this all the time in national news. These gentlemen that you may not, I think you can see them, have been accused of sexual violence, sexual assault, rape. And these are figures that our young men, our boys see in the community. Since 2000, 163 NFL players have been arrested for assaulting women, domestic violence, sexual violence, or child abuse. So once again, these are figures in the community that our young men see and look up to. And it's our job to understand and let them know, get them to understand that even though they are role models, but at some point there's a cutoff to look up to these NFL figures. So once again, gentlemen, let's be aware of who our young men are looking at.
And locally, you may have heard, and unfortunately, you may know of someone connected to some of these, as you can see, some of the incidents that have occurred and are still under investigation, such as the brutal year for Baton Rouge women. Domestic violence deaths in 2020 surpassed a 10-year record. Also, it has been reported and under investigation, LSU report sheds new light on 10 football players accused of rape and domestic violence.
Why men who work with you? Why us? Why us, gentlemen? Because the young men look up to us. They will look to you and model your behavior. We have enormous influence over these young men. We build meaningful relationships with the youth. This is what we do. Whether we want to be a role model or not, this is who we are. These young men are watching everything we do. They listen to everything we say, regardless of what we think. They're watching us. So we must be mindful of our behavior. We must be mindful of what we do and say in front of these young men.
Exactly. And so one of the foremost thinkers in our field, who we really look up to, is a man named Tony Porter. He created an organization called The Call to Men over 20 years ago, I think. He's a really incredible speaker and thinker, and he really likes to focus a lot on how to prevent and intervene in violence against women and girls in particular. And he created something called the Man Box, which is essentially the idea that the way that we socialize men and boys keeps them confined to only a certain set of acceptable behaviors, which really confines and doesn't allow for the wholeness of men. So one of his quotes that I really like and wanted to bring into this space is, "Without a doubt, there are some wonderful, wonderful, absolutely wonderful things about being a man. But at the same time, there's some stuff that's just straight up twisted. And we really need to begin to challenge, look at it, and really get in the process of deconstructing, redefining what we've come to know as manhood." Another thinker that we follow a lot is a man named Jackson Katz. He's also really thinks about violence against women and girls as a man's issue, not as a woman's issue, seeing as the vast majority of violence against women and girls is at the hands of men and boys. And so one quote that I really like of his is that the argument that boys will be boys actually carries the profound anti-male implication that we should expect bad behavior from boys and men. The assumption is that they're somehow not capable of acting appropriately or treating girls and women with respect. And I really appreciate this perspective, that, you know, men should be offended when that argument is used. Oh, boys will be boys. And this assumption is actually really anti-man and anti-male, and that we really should expect good behavior and respect and health from our men and boys. One analogy that I really liked, I was in a training with Tony recently, and he used this analogy, and I think it was really powerful. This tug of war. He said, you know, two guys come up front, right? Come on this side, stay on the right side. And then 8 guys come on up front, you stay on the left side. And we're gonna give you a rope and you're gonna play tug of war. Who's gonna win? The side with 2 or the side with 8? He said, essentially, of course, the side with 8. And what his analogy is that there's only about 20% or a smaller percentage of guys who are perpetuating this violence in our world, the sexual violence, this domestic violence. The vast majority, the 80% of men, want to have respectful relationships, want to have equality with women and girls. But if they don't pull from their side of the rope, if they're not even in this tug of war and let the other 20 just pull, then of course that they're gonna win, right? And so we really need all of y'all out there, the men who are wanting equality and respect with women and girls, to be fighting against this 20% and be part of this tug of war with the rest of us. Because of course, if all 80% are with us, then there's no way to lose.
In addition to what Eva just spoke about, Tony Clayton has a curriculum that she mentioned, a call to men. I'll be willing to come out and speak to your group, your school, or your organization, if you would like to. So just, as Eva said, we'll share our information at the end. So please contact me. Right now, I want you to listen to this video. It's about the No More Project, or No More organization.
No more boys will be boys. No more, what's the big deal? No more, it's just the way he is. No more, he just has a temper. No more, but he's such a nice guy. No more, but he has such a bright future. No more, not my problem. No more, I'll say something next time. No more, why didn't she tell anyone? No more, why doesn't she just leave? No more, I'm sure they'll work it out. No more, she seems fine to me. No more, what was she wearing? No more, she was drunk. No more, he was drunk. No more, she was asking for it. No more, she never said no. No more, not in this family. No more, not on this team. No more, we don't talk about that. No more bystanding. No more ignorance. No more excuses. No more.
I want to show you recognize some of those spaces, and they were from former NFL players. They partnered with the No More organization. An organization is dedicated to ending sexual assault and domestic violence and increasing awareness of all. Let's take a time and reflect basically on what we just heard. As we said earlier, when you take care of yourself. So let's take a little breather. Just think about what you've digested, and how you can once again help our youth understand or recognize these issues.
Moving on to part two, kind of the definitions and helping to understand what are we talking about, right? We just kind of shared a lot of statistics and some celebrities and some thoughts, and now we kind of want to explain, okay, what is this issue? So when I say the words intimate partner violence, probably some things come to mind. What do you think of? What are the first things that you think of?
I would think either manipulation, utilizing power and control over someone by bullying, exercising physical abuse, possibly psychological, financial, emotional abuse, as well as sexual abuse.
Great. Yeah, those are a lot of things that that you just covered. Exactly. I think a lot of people sometimes just think about the physical, and so we're going to really talk about all the other types, some of which Ms. Sharon just shared. So when we talk about intimate partner violence, we're thinking about a pattern of behaviors which are coercive and abusive. And the point is to gain power and control over your partner. Sometimes this is done very consciously and very intentionally, and sometimes it's a little bit more subconscious or unconscious, but the result is that you are dominating and having the power in the relationship. So, we try to explain to groups a lot that a one-time use of violence doesn't in and of itself mean that it is an abusive relationship. It is still violence, and we're not condoning, violence is violence, and that's not okay. And yet we're really looking at the whole dynamic and the whole pattern within the relationship around power, rather than just, okay, she slapped him or he pushed her. Those are acts of violence, but we want to think about beyond those, just those simple acts. So one way that I like to explain it is by this term objectification. When we say objectification, a lot of times we think of the media like sexualizing or hypersexualizing women's bodies. That is a form of objectification, but in this context, I use it to think of this dehumanizing, making somebody less than, right? If I am the subject and you are the object, you are the possession, you are the thing to be acted upon, and it is my choice about how I get to act upon you because you're just the object, right? So we're thinking about who gets to make the decisions, right? Who gets to make the rules in the relationships? Is this an open dialogue and a discussion, or am I really saying, nope, this is the way it is. You will do as I say, or you will decide based on what I want. Controlling the resources or controlling somebody's body, controlling somebody's decisions is really what abuse boils down to. And of course, there's a spectrum, right? It doesn't start out that way. And certainly it's not always that extreme, but that's often what it evolves to be in an abusive situation, is this kind of inequality of decision-making and of power. Since we're talking about power, we really want to make a note that, relationships don't exist in a vacuum. They exist within the context of our society. And of course, that there are imbalances of power across our whole society. Yes, we are talking about in the interpersonal between usually two individuals, but we also want to talk about how it intersects with power more broadly. So we know that absolutely anyone, any kind of person, any race, any gender, any sexual orientation, any ethnicity can be abused or can be abusive. But we are impacted very differently by our identities and by our differing levels of privilege and disadvantage in society, right? So marginalization and oppression, like racism, like homophobia, like chronic poverty, really increase our vulnerability and decrease usually our access to resources. And so it often can lead to being stuck in relationships longer. We also just want to acknowledge that historically violence was used as a very intentional tool of slavery, of colonization, of oppression, of all kinds of oppression, right? Controlling another person's body and autonomy and resources and freedom is kind of part and parcel to all types of oppression. So, the interpersonal that we're talking about today very much intersects with the structural power inequities that exist in our society. And certainly if you are targeted for your identity in other aspects, say on the street, you're targeted because of your race or your gender identity, and then you come home and you're not safe at home because you're targeted by your partner, that compounds, that increases your vulnerability. You're less likely to be able to reach out for help from, say, the police or traditional sources. You might be isolated because you've been marginalized. So just kind of want to note that power is on multiple levels when we talk about power, although today we will be focusing primarily between individuals. So one more way that I like to explain power or explain relationships is using this spectrum. So on the right-hand side, we have healthy relationships, right? These are the kinds of relationships that we all deserve, that we all want, that we're all trying to attain successfully or unsuccessfully, but we're respecting each other, we're hearing each other, we're lifting each other up, making each other better. There is conflict because conflict is part of every single relationship, but when conflict arises, we find a way back to each other. We find a way to hear each other out and, disagree and apologize and forgive and actually change. It's not just an empty apology, but change our behaviors based on how we impact the other person or harm the other person. You don't want to harm the other person, although of course we all do in relationship. That happens even in the healthiest of relationships. Harm happens. But really, when you think about it, we're sharing power. I'm not trying to have power over you. I want to share the power, even if we have separate roles or, our separate lives. We can share this power, and I respect your own personal power, and you respect mine, right? In the middle, in the yellow, we have unhealthy relationships. These are also probably really familiar to most of us. We may have experienced them at some point in our lives. It's the toxic relationships, the high conflict relationships, we're cutting each other down, we're not hearing each other, we're not able to find our way back through conflict. It's kind of a power struggle. And we're not able to repair the harm that we're doing to each other. And for various reasons, right? We may not be able to, we may not be in the right state, we may not be the right people for each other, right? It's a power struggle. But then it's the line between unhealthy and abusive, right? The red on the left, that I think is really tricky for people to kind of recognize, okay, this is veering into abuse. This is becoming a pattern where one person is trying to have power over the other. Again, thinking about it through the lens of power. Is there somebody who's kind of dominating and trying to make the rules and won't listen to the ways in which this impacts the other person, or doesn't care, right? Is there one person who has to kind of accommodate all the time and fit their needs into the other person because the other person is just demanding that? They don't get to have their own life because they're really trying to make this other person happy. That's sort of one way to think about the spectrum of relationships, thinking about it through power.
We're talking about intimate partner violence, and within intimate partner violence, we've stated earlier, there are different forms of abuse. And I'll start by sharing with you, how do we identify emotional abuse? And it's by way of someone name calling or insulting someone, degradation, belittling a person, public humiliation by embarrassing someone in public or just in front of someone, belittling, dismissiveness, and also accusations of cheating are all forms of emotional abuse. Al, would you share with us now some
Sure.
forms of psychological abuse?
Sure. Thank you, Ms. Sharon. Psychological abuse is hiding or destroying important belongings. I don't know, let's say you, girl or boy, might want to take a ride in this car, you might hide the keys. And so that means you can't go nowhere. Psychological abuse can also be deflecting responsibility, never admitting fault. You know, somebody say, I'm never wrong, I'm always right. And you all get to that point. And you play mind games. You know the person, how they think and how they operate, and you know what their weaknesses and what their strengths are, and you tend to play little mind games with them. And then in addition to that, you can minimize, denying, blaming, and gaslighting. Having them think that they're crazy, just tripping. I didn't say that. That's not what I said. That's not what I did. You know, is when our paper terms we use, you tripping. So a lot of those little psychological games you play is considered psychological abuse.
Yeah, absolutely. And most of the forms of abuse on this page are completely legal too, just another aspect to think about. Most of these are not, criminal acts that could be used, held accountable by the legal system. Another big aspect that we see is isolation, right? This is a very common tactic, and there's different ways in which this plays out. They could manipulate the legal system, right? Whether that's through the family court and the civil court with custody, or through calling the police when you are actually not the victim, but are actually perpetrating the abuse and calling the police on your victim. Monitoring where somebody goes, monitoring their email, looking at their phone, let me see your texts. The idea behind it is really to create a separation between anyone who could support you, provide support to you and the victim, so that they become more and more isolated and fewer people to reach out to. We see this a lot with people moving across country where the victim doesn't have any family ties or any friendships to isolate them further. It can also look like accompanying them to every single appointment, right? Part of that is mistrust, and part of that, again, is the control and wanting to make sure that they are completely dependent on the person who is abusive, right? So every single appointment they want to be at, they want to accompany or give rides to. They don't want you to have contact with other people. They don't want you to talk to your old friends or call your people and tell them the truth of what's happening. And what this kind of boils down to is a possessiveness. Again, going back to this idea that you are my object. I possess you. You're mine. We even say that in a kind of romantic way, right? You're mine. She's mine. He's mine. But it kind of, you know, symbolizes that we think of each other as possessions, and that's actually pretty unhealthy and can lead to these kind of isolating and abusive tactics.
Last but certainly not least, economic abuse. It's not to be taken lightly, but it is evident. Someone can actually not allow someone to get a job, sabotage their job or their income, telling them how to spend their money, where to bring their money, taking full control of a payroll if there is one, controlling all of the family income that comes within the household, and actually taking advantage of someone by ruining their credit.
Moving on to some of the more obvious ones, again, the things that I think people think about a lot are the physical aspects, right? So hitting somebody with an object, throwing objects across the room, slapping, shoving, pushing, punching with a closed fist, or kicking, choking and strangling is something that we're going to cover a little bit later. It's unfortunately a really common form of abuse. Threatening someone with a weapon or actually using a weapon, even punching a wall behind someone, right? You're threatening physical abuse. You're showing that could be you. I'm choosing to punch the wall instead, but really it's a threat of physical abuse or actual physical abuse, of course.
Then we move on to spiritual abuse. And, you know, we have some people that are really good at quoting scriptures and using scriptures against people and manipulating the Bible and justifying their actions by a certain scripture. And they tend to want to use that against a person. And you also have where we force someone to practice faith in a certain way. I know we all have different faiths, you know, we Catholic, Baptist, whatever, what have you. And so you want to try to manipulate that person to look at things their way, with their faith. And then the biggest thing, they have a guilt trip or pressure their mate or their significant other to stay based on their religion, based on their faith. You know, we hear some scriptures all the time, and even when sometimes the vows that say the woman's supposed to be submissive to the husband, and some people tend to take that to another level, misunderstand it. Once again, manipulate it to their understanding or how they want someone else to view their point. So spiritual abuse can be very powerful.
Last but certainly not the least is sexual abuse. Pressuring someone into sexual acts, forced sex, rape, doing anything sexually without that person's consent, controlling birth control, the reproductive decisions.
Absolutely. So one way that we describe, or has been a common way to describe domestic violence or intimate partner violence, is through this cycle, the cycle of abuse. And the idea behind it is essentially that, you know, relationships never start out abusive from day one. Usually there's a honeymoon period. There's a part when you're really excited. Of course, relationships are beautiful, they're fun. You can be, you know, really into each other in the beginning. Everything is going fantastic. You're connected, and everything is wonderful. And that honeymoon period can last, you know, a couple weeks, a couple months, a couple years. But at some point it kind of transitions, usually without the person realizing, into this tension building phase, right? There's things bubbling under the surface. There's the criticisms and the critiques and things, the resentments are building. Things aren't getting resolved. There's tension building and building. And this stage can last a very long time. And then sometimes, but not always, there's this moment of violence. And whether that's physical or not, often there can be this moment which then brings remorse. I'm so sorry, I'll never do that again. I'll go to counseling, let's be better. The kind of makeup phase and back to the honeymoon and around and around and around. And really, even the honeymoon phase is part of the violence too. The way that a lot of survivors describe it is like even the good times and the sweet times can be all part of, in hindsight usually, right? They don't realize it in the moment, but in hindsight, they see that the whole package is actually, again, going back to control. And even the sweet parts and the I love yous and the flowers and the making up is to further that control. A lot of survivors don't actually identify with it being a cycle like this. It's not usually a perfect cycle. Some people describe it more like a roller coaster, right? Like I'm on this ride and I really have no idea when or how I can get off. And I don't know where I am because the other person, the person who is abusing, is in kind of control of the ride. So the cycle is not always a perfect cycle, but I think it's a useful tool to think about how the dynamics change and why it can be so difficult to get out. Because this honeymoon phase is usually, what brings back the hope, what brings back the love, what kind of keeps people feeling like, okay, that's probably the last time, or that won't happen again, or we'll get better. And unfortunately, it often doesn't.
In addition to what we just finished talking about, understand that an abuser or perpetrator, they're sitting back and their whole goal is to gain control. So they're watching everything that you do. They're learning you. They're learning that person, and so that's how come they become they know how to manipulate that person. But their whole goal is to gain control. So they're watching everything they say and do. They know their weakness. They know their strengths. So just keep that in mind. That's what perpetrators and abusers do. Now let's move on to some team-specific dynamics. Sexting, pressuring for pictures. We all know now these youth have different social media outlets. They have their cell phones and they get pressured to text certain parts of their body, boys and girls. And of course, this can lead to the next level of cyberbullying. So just be mindful of these things. And of course, all this boils down to peer pressure. And I just spoke about the social media part. And so there's a lot of pressure that our teens are going through, girls and boys. And it's a lack of communication. They don't have good negotiating skills. They must learn their boundaries and expectations of their relationships are unclear. They just don't know how to say no or stop some things, or no, don't do this or don't do that. In a lot of ways, they have distrust for adults and authority figures. That's why as role models, we must gain their trust. We must let them know that there's an trusted adult that they can go to. And because they're young, they're adolescents, they get confused sometimes. Sometimes they don't know if they're an adult, and sometimes they don't know if they're a child, and they don't know, it's impulsivity. They want to take certain risks that they think they can take, but they're not ready for. And of course, all teenagers and adolescents are rebellious. So understand those dynamics. And when we're dealing with our youth, we have to look for those. That's our job as adults, to control those things and help give them a better understanding of who they are.
High risk for lethality, homicide. These are some of the examples that could lead to homicide behaviors, acts such as stalking, strangulation, gun ownership, threats to kill a partner, kill the children, or kill oneself, physical abuse during pregnancy, being violently jealous, controlling one's daily activities, forced sex, and escalation, meaning the behavior escalates, it gets more and more severe.
Yeah, so these slides aren't meant to scare anyone. We just kind of want to point out the ones that are particularly high risk. We, of course, are always trying to prevent homicide and prevent serious injury. So we just wanted to point out a few of these that are more highly correlated with lethality. And the one that we really try to kind of harp on, to be honest, a bit in all of our trainings is strangulation. And because it's a massive public health issue. So we've found that it's one of the most common and the most dangerous forms of abuse. Unfortunately, every year without fail, over 60%, usually around 65% of the clients who walk through the New Orleans Family Justice Center have been choked or strangled by their partner at least once, usually multiple times. And what they have found, studies have shown over and over again, is that you are 7.5 times more likely to be killed by your partner if your partner has strangled you. So most people aren't strangling their partner to actually kill them, right? They're showing that they could. They're saying, like, I have your life in my hands. I am in control. I own you, essentially, and I could kill you. When folks die by homicide by their partner, it's most often by a gun. But what they have found is that almost 100% of people who have been killed by their partner have been strangled by them in the past. So it's highly correlated with lethality. It also impacts memory, right? So this little red part in the brain that you're seeing on the screen is the hypothalamus, which usually is responsible for coding memory. But in an incident, it actually shuts down that part of it so that it can pump cortisol, which is the stress response. So often people will say, you know, he had me up against the wall and was cutting off my air with his forearm in the kitchen. And then all of a sudden I woke up in the bedroom, right? As an example, I don't really remember what happened. And of course, the longer somebody's strangled, the more their memory is often impacted. It also doesn't leave marks for the most part on the outside, on your neck. Especially if you have dark skin, it's very unlikely that you're going to see much. But the internal damage is severe. It can be very, very serious. You can have vocal damage. You, of course, can have brain damage because it only takes a couple seconds to cut off blood flow to the brain. You can have burst blood vessels on the brain, in the eyes, in the nose, in the mouth. Of course, it's highly correlated with post-traumatic stress disorder, again, because it's such a life or death moment that it really leads to a lot of PTSD in survivors. And it's also been linked to increased risk for miscarriage and stroke, sometimes years and years later. So it's a really serious form of abuse, and one that we are, again, not trying to scare the community, but we're just trying to give the information so that folks can be aware, unfortunately, about this kind of hidden but really serious behavior. So that's an intense slide to end, not to end on, but to be on. And I know that we've been through a lot. So we just wanted to take a quick breather, check in with your body, take a nice, big, deep breath. Hopefully this has been informational and not too upsetting, but also it's okay if that's, you know, a bit upsetting to learn about or to hear about. So again, just be kind to yourself, be gentle with yourself as we go through the material. We are going to move on to a scenario.
Yes, we'd like to share with you a real scenario of Brian and Lisa. Lisa, 21, and Brian, 26, have been dating on and off for 6 years, since Lisa was 15. When they first started dating, they were madly in love, and Brian showered Lisa with gifts and attention from the beginning. She was flattered that he was so into her and didn't seem to have any hesitations. Brian promised to take her away from New Orleans and her abusive family as soon as he could. Looking back, Lisa remembered that he would pick her up from school every day and quickly began questioning her if she were late to meet him. On multiple occasions, he said he was jealous of her male friends at school because he loved her and because she was too beautiful. After a few months of dating, Brian said she really needed to stop hanging around them because it wasn't fair to him. A few months later, Brian started disparaging her girlfriends, calling them hoes and idiots, and said they were a bad influence on her. By her senior year, Lisa had stopped hanging out with any of her old friends. A couple years later, Brian got a really good job and convinced Lisa, when they moved in together, that she didn't need to work. Lisa began to suspect that Brian was throwing away her birth control pills. But when she confronted him about it, he called her crazy and yelled at her for being forgetful and stupid. Lisa didn't have the money to buy more, so she became pregnant for the first time at 19. She knew Brian wanted to keep the pregnancy, but she wanted to go to school. Lisa got an abortion in secret and told him that she miscarried, which led to the first physical incident. He punched her in the face, fracturing her jaw. She went to the ER the next day, but told them it was an accident. After that, arguments would turn physical at least once a week, and Brian was convinced that Lisa was cheating on him. Lisa tried everything to prove her loyalty and even agreed to have a baby with him 2 years later. She is now 7 months pregnant. Lisa has not told anyone about the abuse, even her OBGYN during her prenatal visits. 2 nights ago, he strangled her to unconsciousness. She is terrified that calling the police will make only matters worse. So she calls the Family Justice Center after Brian goes to work. As you've heard the story, what forms of abuse do you see in this story? I'm going to ask my co-presenters, what forms of abuse can we identify, or you identify, that you see in this story?
Sure.
Al?
I see a range of abuse here, you know, but starting off with the spectrum of the honeymoon period. He showered her with gifts and made it, you know, seem like he was madly in love with her, and she loved all the attention. We also have the abuse of, he was jealous. You know, he isolated her from her friends. She was questioning why she was late coming to, when we come pick her up. He started putting, I didn't say it, putting her friends down. We had a lot of verbal abuse, calling, yelling at her. He punched her one time. Then he tried to control her with finances because he wanted her to not stop working. So he would be the breadwinner of the family because no other money coming in. He threw away her birth control pills because he wanted her to get pregnant. And she had to hide that she had an abortion, I believe. So she made it, yeah, she told me she had a miscarriage. And so she also was hiding the abuse from, you know, from other people, and the abuse got worse and worse, and he started strangling her. So I believe they went to this scenario went to the whole spectrum of forms of abuse. So it was a bad relationship all the way around.
I would agree. I saw lots of isolation. I saw gaslighting. I saw the possessiveness. There were a lot of points that Coach Al already hit: the physical, the sexual, the reproductive, the economic, the psychological. All the forms of abuse pretty much were there in that story.
In identifying all of the forms of abuse and some of the high risk factors, and with that being said, Eva, why might Lisa stay?
Yeah, just really briefly to touch on the high risk factors that I see 3 specific ones that make me especially nervous. Like we said, there's all kinds of forms of abuse in that, but the 3 things that really stick out to me as far as high risk are, of course, the strangulation that we covered. There was actually stalking, that wasn't going to be one of them, but stalking. The physical abuse during pregnancy is a really bad sign, like he's capable of abusing her physically during pregnancy. That shows that he's like capable of doing even worse. And then the fact that it's escalating, getting more frequent and more severe. Those are the ones that I see. And I think there's a lot of reasons that Lisa might stay. As scary as the situation is, I could see, the fact that she's 7 months pregnant with his child. The fact that she probably doesn't have a source of income on her own. And the fact that we know her family is abusive. So she probably doesn't have a lot of family support or a lot of friends. Those are all reasons that I could see why she might want to stick it out and see, see if it gets better, or just for lack of another option, she might stay. Coach Jones, you want to talk a little bit more about other reasons that people stay?
Sure. A list of reasons why a person might stay. One is shame. They can't believe that it's happening to them. They're a statistic. Denial, confusion. She doesn't mean to hurt me, does she? Fear of not being believed. Last time I called the police, everyone said I was lying. Children, childcare. I must put up with this for the sake of the children. Faith. I can't face my pastor after he counseled us to stay together. Financial. I have nowhere else to go. I have no savings. That last scenario, remember, he asked her to stop working. Social pressure. My family loves her and thinks she's the best I can do. Some of the partners are charming to the in-laws and to the mother-in-laws and to the family members, and they think that the world of that person, but they don't know what that person is doing to the partner. Trauma bonding. He's my ride or die. No one else understands me. The last scenario, he isolated from all the friends. So basically, he became the only friend that she had. And so at the end, it's hope. We just have to keep hope alive. In this case, though, they thought that love would conquer all. They just kept saying, I hope it gets better. I hope it gets better. I hope it gets better. I hope he changes. I hope she changes. So that's the thought of love can conquer all.
There are a lot of reasons that people stay. And I think that we just want to kind of think, help everyone understand that this idea of just leaving, just get away from this person, isn't as easy as it sounds. There are a lot of reasons that that's not possible. And this question, why don't you just go already? Why don't you just leave? It's a understandable question. If it's somebody that you care about and that you love, you don't want to see them get hurt. You don't want to see them go through this again and again and again. And so we understand why people ask the question, but really we're trying to help the community understand that it's the wrong question to ask. And some of the reasons why we feel like it's the wrong question is that it blames the victim for their partner's behavior. It says, instead of focusing on like, well, why is this person being abusive? You're saying you're putting all the onus and all the responsibility on the survivor or the victim to just leave, as if that would just solve everything, right? It implies that the victim has never thought of leaving or tried to leave already, right? Most victims definitely think about leaving, consider leaving, or have already tried, sometimes multiple times, and for many reasons, many valid reasons, go back. For some of the reasons that Coach Jones mentioned in the last slide, right? You end up having to go back or choosing to go back. And this idea of just leave already it's not that simple, right? It also implies safety would come about if they just left. We know, especially in these high risk cases, that the moment the person actually chooses to leave, if they don't make a plan to do so safely, that's actually the most dangerous moment. Because if you're talking about somebody who's controlling, having their partner leave is the ultimate loss of control for them, right? It's the ultimate moment. And if they're already displaying a lot of physical abuse, a lot of high risk behaviors like threatening with guns, threatening to kill, sometimes they will follow through on those threats. in that moment that the person is finally like, I'm done, I'm leaving, I'm out. So it can be dangerous. The question also implies that leaving makes the abuse stop, which we know for a fact it doesn't. Many of our clients are dealing with ongoing abuse, sometimes for years and years after they make the decision to leave, right? Especially if they have children together. Again, they can use the legal systems or the custody system to keep them with some level of control and continue the abuse for years, even when it's somebody's ex. That's a very common thing that happens. It also just implies that this is an easy decision, which brings me to just a reflection question we like to ask our audiences. How many of us have ever stayed in a relationship just a little too long? Right? In hindsight, looking back, you're like, ooh, probably many of us, most of us, I certainly have had that in hindsight, like, wow, I really should have left, a few months earlier, a few years earlier, but you're invested, right? You're hoping things will change. You're trying to work it out. It's a really common and normal experience, right? And so, particularly in abusive relationships, let's have some compassion for the victims or the survivors who stay and try to work it out, or who go back, and not blame them for the ongoing abuse.
You've heard a lot of information in regards to intimate partner violence, which we can take into consideration domestic violence as well as sexual assault. And as you sit there as coaches, as you sit there as mentors, as you sit there as an influencer, or you may be a staff member within a school setting, and you ask yourself the question, well, I've taken all this information, what can I do? And here, Eva and Al will share with you strategies of some ways you can intervene and positively influence the youth that you work with.
Yeah, so we really want to highlight that there are lots of different situations you might find yourself in. You've probably already found yourself in. And so you need to employ very different kinds of strategies based on the situation that you find yourself in. So one thing that we try to do in all of our trainings is to talk about red flags. Coach Jones is going to go through some red flags with you all so that you can kind of be on the lookout. Not to actually do anything, but just to kind of be a little bit more aware, hone in on that sense, the sense that something might be wrong. When you think something might be wrong, either you suspect that somebody you're working with is a victim or a perpetrator of violence. We want to give you an example of how you can approach that situation carefully when you don't exactly know, you haven't seen with your own two eyes, but you suspect that there's something going on, or maybe you hear about something happening, but you haven't seen it. Then there are those situations when you actually directly see something. And those situations are opportunities for actual intervention. We're going to have an example of that. The other thing that happens a lot, especially with trusted adults like yourselves, is that youth will come to you. Hopefully, that's a good sign, right? That they disclose something that has happened to them already. And so we want you to be able to respond really compassionately and thoughtfully when a youth discloses something really sensitive and really personal with you. And then finally, we're going to talk a little bit about just modeling behavior. As Coach Jones mentioned, youth are looking up to you. Youth are looking at your own behaviors as a model for them. So some of our thoughts of ways in which you can be that positive role model.
It's coaches and mentors, teachers, and whatever your relationship is with our youth, you come in contact with them, and so you get to kind of know their behaviors, and you get a chance to see them in action. I know as a former coach, I had an opportunity to watch film on kids in practice, and you notice some things different. And as a teacher, you may see a kid in the classroom, they may act different that day or a couple of days. And as mentors, when we work with kids, one day they may be this way, and the next day or next time we see them, they're different. So these become red flags if there are victims. And so, for instance, problems with attendance, particularly if this is a new problem, lack of interest in extracurricular activities, unexplained changes in behavior, grades, or quality of schoolwork, notice change in weight, demeanor, physical appearance, isolation from former friends. Something comes to mind when I was coaching, and I knew that I saw this young man, and he had a good relationship. So I thought with this young lady, and so I started kind of missing practice. And so I went up to him one day and I asked him, why you missed practice? He didn't say it, but I can tell he wanted to be with this young lady. So I said, well, look, man, let's do this here. How about if I allow her to come and watch you practice, and she can stand by the gate and you can be practicing, and you know where she's at and she know where you are. And so he went for it, and it worked. But the thing there is, I observed this behavior. I looked at a red flag. And so anyway, I just wanted to share that little funny story with you. But it's also when it becomes little social contact with anyone else but the dating partner. Unexplained bruises or injuries. Making excuses or apologizing for the dating partner's inappropriate behavior. Sometimes, these kids' partner may say some ugly things to them in front of other people, or say something about somebody else, and so they tend to start apologizing for them. As a teacher, you may see new behavior problems at school, such as bullying or other students acting out. We see these things in the classroom a lot, or in the hallways, cafeteria, and a large age gap between dating partners. Sometimes we don't realize it, but it happens in schools a lot. You may have a senior young man who's probably 18, 19 years old, maybe dating a young lady that's in 10th grade, 15, 16 years old. And sometimes the gap may be wider than that. But those are some of the things that are red flags that we need to look out for when we're dealing with our youth. Now, this is the other end of the spectrum. We need to also observe the young men we work with on the other end, how they talk about girls or dating partners as possession or objects. These are, our perpetrators, our abusers. It's a progression. How they objectify girls, women, or they say certain things about their partner's body types. They brag about sexual activities or pressures others to talk about their sexual activities. They won't ever take responsibility for actions or harm. They have been abused in their home or witnessed abuse in the home. As funny as it is, that's modeling the behavior. Somebody, our people, our young men who we work with may see abuse in their home. So they think that's the way to get things done. That's the way it's supposed to be. They make sexist, racist, homophobic, or transphobic jokes. It happens a lot, when somebody's different than what you are. Our kids seem to think that's funny. They seem to think that something's different. So once again, we need to observe those type of behaviors. A sense of entitlement. We like to use the term spiral sometimes, but some of our kids come to us that way. They think it's about them. They think the world revolves around them. And sometimes that's not their fault. But once again, as mentors, teachers, and coaches, that's what we're supposed to observe, this type of behavior. And one of the final things is generalized anger. It gets into lots of fights. We know at schools there are a lot of fights, but we need to find out when we attach to this kid, why is he fighting? Why? How has this happened to come about? A couple of weeks ago, you were a nice, gentle young man. Now all of a sudden, you're getting into fights. So these are some of the red flags that we need to be aware of with the victims and the perpetrators. So let's be mindful of this, coaches, teachers, mentors, and our young men go through all these stages. So that's a part of our job to observe these things.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think, like you said, Coach Jones, when you see a red flag or you hear about something or suspect something, it can be really hard. Okay, well, what do I do now? Like, I've heard this or I'm seeing a red flag. How do I approach this? How do I approach the situation? These are just a few tips, I would say, that you have to, again, customize to the situation. But I think it's really helpful if in the back of your mind you think, okay, the goal, if this is happening, if something is happening where somebody is being harmed, the goal is to provide safety for whoever has been harmed, the victim, the survivor, and accountability for those who are causing the harm, right? So even if you just stop for a second and think, okay, that's my goal. How can I provide safety and accountability based on what I think is happening? And of course, you have to find out a little bit more, usually. So the first thing is never talk to these two individuals together, right? You think, okay, something's happening between a couple. I'm going to pull them both into my office and sit them both down and say, this is unacceptable. You two are fighting in the hallway. I can't have that. I can understand that that might be your reaction, but it could cause further harm if it is actually an abusive situation, right? You never want to talk to them together. You always want to separate the two parties and talk to them separately as individuals. And if you have, say, a better rapport with one of them, but maybe you don't know the other person, then maybe try to get another adult in with you and to talk to the other person. Whoever has a good relationship and a good rapport might be a better messenger for the other person, right? But at the end of the day, separate them, talk to them individually. I would suggest if you do have a relationship with both and there is one person that you suspect is being harmed, I would talk to that person first, just so you can kind of hear their side and hear what they're needing in order to create safety, rather than getting the side of the person that is causing the harm. And again, you may not know, but if you suspect one or the other, I would talk to the person being harmed first. Always come from a place of concern, not accusation, right? As soon as you start accusing right off the bat or blaming somebody right off the bat, no matter which role they're in, you're going to get defensiveness, right? You're going to get their walls up very quickly and you're not going to really get anywhere. So, and it is concerning. You should be concerned rather than angry about this, right? You might feel anger or frustration or annoyance, but if you can try to kind of temper that, your own feelings, so that you can actually think about, okay, this is concerning. I want my kids to be safe. I want my kids to treat each other respectfully. I am concerned about what I'm hearing, and come from that place, right? Of that authenticity and that genuine concern. As I mentioned, be prepared for total outright denial or defensiveness. That's normal, right? No matter whether you're talking to a victim or someone who's causing harm, they are definitely may not own up to what's actually happening, and that's okay. Just be prepared for that, and be prepared for how you can kind of talk about it, even if they're not giving you much of anything. You can say, hey, I understand you may not, feel safe or trusting of me yet to talk about what's happening, but I've noticed these things. I'm concerned about these things. Do you feel comfortable, or would you tell me a little bit more? And if they don't, that's okay. Just keep kind of planting the seeds that you are a safe and trusted adult. Or on the other side of things, if you think they're really causing harm, but they're getting defensive, you kind of need to alter your tone a bit and say, hey, I understand that you don't want to cop to what's happening. You don't want to admit that this is what you're doing. But if you are, I'm here to tell you that that is not acceptable behavior, that is not appropriate. That is not how you treat somebody. And I'm still here for you. And I'm here to work through it with you. And it's not okay. So the tone is really going to alter based on what role you think that they have, because you don't want to collude with abusive behavior, right? And you don't want to blame a victim. On the other hand, you want to provide support and safety to a victim, emotional safety to a victim, and accountability for somebody who's causing harm.
We are well aware that texting has become a huge form of communication, but not only texting, but sexting, as Mr. Al previously spoke about. And I'm here to share with you an example of sexting. You hear that one of the boys you work with got pressured into sending a semi-naked picture of himself to a girl he's hanging out with. Then she shared it with a bunch of her friends, and it ended up on social media. The boy is humiliated and angry, but his friends just think it's funny. Coach Al, what might you say to that boy?
And I would encourage him not to be pressured to send pictures of himself to anybody, regardless of his feelings about the person who's asking for the pictures. I would encourage him to be more confident in saying no, and understanding his boundaries and the expectations of the relationship that he has with these different people. He doesn't have to be ashamed of anything, but I would encourage him to understand that, you know, sometimes we do things and it's not our fault. So along those lines, just let him know that in this world, people are going to try to do ugly things to you, and that you have to also feel like if you do make a mistake, continue going with your life and learn from the mistake.
And Eva, what might you would say to the girl?
Yeah, it's a touchy situation, but I would pull the girl aside privately, let her know that I knew what had happened, and really convey that it's not okay, that what she did was absolutely unacceptable and inappropriate, right? You shouldn't ever pressure somebody, first of all, to share anything private. And if they do choose to share something private with you, then you keep it private, right? It's not okay that she shared it with her friends. It's not okay. I mean, even if it wasn't her intention for it to end up on social media, it did. And that's what happens when you don't keep somebody's privacy. It can happen. And so not only is it really mean-spirited and unkind and disrespectful, it's also illegal, right? Sharing a nude photo of another person or a semi-nude photo potentially is actually a crime. And so I think I would approach her and tell her honestly that it's not only not okay, and but that it's really, really wrong, and potentially illegal what she did. And I think ultimately what you're trying to do when somebody has harmed another person is create empathy, right? I would say, how would you feel if he did that to you? If you had gotten pressure to send something and then he shared it with all of his friends and it ended up on TikTok or Snapchat or something like that, you would be mortified. You would be humiliated. How do you think he feels right now? What can you do to make this better? And I'm going to be here to support you in, making some steps to make sure this is repaired, right? What can you do in this moment? I'm going to hold you accountable and make sure that you make a real apology to this person, and make it better, right? How can you make it better? And depending on what he is feeling, what that looks like could be different. I think that's kind of more the conversation with the boys, like, what are you needing in this moment that you have been harmed? Like, how can we make it better? What do you need from this girl? So, just treating him like a victim and telling him that it's not his fault, as Coach Jones said, and that she's really caused a lot of harm. And maybe even talking to all the friends too, the girlfriends and the guy friends, and talking about the severity of the incident, and not just saying like, it's funny, haha, look at what happened to this person. No, this is a human being. This is your classmate. This is someone who's been harmed. Yeah. So that's what I would say to her. So that was an example of sort of like when you suspect something. And now we're going to get into something like the intervention piece if you actually see this. So there's a little video. It's about 5 minutes that we're going to watch together.
So you guys are getting along again?
Yeah,
What did he do? Apologize this time?
not exactly, but he did give me flowers this morning. Chris King, what are you doing here?
Turns out my mom didn't like Nebraska after all.
Chris King, long time no see.
Yeah, all the way since 7th grade. That's about it.
That's 3 years, Chris. Who won the race?
I don't even know. I couldn't see.
Oh, that chain you're under your boyfriend?
Yeah, his name is Marcus. You want to meet him?
Sure.
Okay, well, I'll just see you guys later then.
All right.
Bye. Let's go say hi to Marcus. I want you to meet him. Let's go. Hey, Ben, how'd you do?
Dude, I won the race.
I'm sorry, I missed you running. I was talking to Chris.
What do you mean you missed it?
I'm sorry, I missed you running. I didn't mean to.
I'm Chris, man.
What are you doing?
Babe, we gotta get going. It's time to go to the party anyways. Can't be sticking around.
Okay.
Get your things and meet me in the car.
I'm sorry. I don't know what's wrong with them. I guess it's like stress from track and stuff.
What's she doing over there?
What's your number? Oh, I can.
555
555
0403.
0403.
What in the world is she doing?
Marcus, wait. Well, yeah. I'll see you later.
All right.
Bye. Oh my gosh, my feet hurt so bad from these freaking hips.
So who is that you were talking to?
I told you my childhood best friend Chris.
How come I never heard about him?
There's a lot of things you don't know about me.
Oh, really?
What does that mean?
You know what? You missed my race. And you talked to some other guy. Just get out and walk.
What?
You heard me? Go.
Babe, I told you I'm sorry.
You know what? No. I don't want to hear it. Just get out and walk right now.
Who is it? Kelly. Come in. Hey, Keisha, you ready to go to the party?
Oh, you making cookies?
Yeah.
Ready for the party?
Not exactly.
What do you mean?
I'm not going anymore.
Why?
Oh my God.
Is it because of Marcus?
Maybe.
What happened?
We got into an argument earlier and he kicked me out the car.
He kicked you out of the car.
Yes, it made me walk all the way home in those hills.
For what?
Remember we was at the track meet earlier and we saw Chris started catching up.
Yeah.
We missed his race and everything. He's upset over that.
Wow. Well, regardless to what happened, that was uncalled for.
I mean, like, it was my fault.
No, it wasn't your fault. That wasn't your fault.
I missed this big race. What are you talking about?
I mean, yeah, you did, but he's won a million races and he's gonna win a million more. I mean, what's the big deal? No, I think we should go to my mom's group counseling session. I mean, she helps with teens who are in abusive relationships.
Abuse. He's never hit me before.
Okay, but he's very possessive over you and he's verbally abusive.
Kelly.
Keisha, please, I really think you should go. You're my best friend and you deserve better.
Well, you should get going to that party.
I'm not going to that party. I'm gonna stay with my best friend.
Really?
Really.
Thank you.
So what do you think we should do?
Chill, hang out, eat cookies. Oh, shoot the cookies.
That was a little video example of an abusive situation or potentially abusive situation. Let's say that you were working with Marcus. Marcus was your student, your athlete, and you actually saw those interactions with Marcus and Keisha. Coach Jones, what might you do, and Miss Sharon, what would either one of you do if you saw those interactions?
Well, I would, as a coach, and obviously Marcus is an athlete. First, I would let him know about the different types of abuse that he was displaying to his girlfriend. First of all, he was jealous of the other young man. He was upset because she didn't watch his race. He degraded the young lady in front of the friend, the public humiliation there. And those are signs that I saw with as far as Marcus having the potential of being an abuser or a perpetrator. And I would let him know that there are certain ways that you're supposed to, treat, if that's your girlfriend, treat your girlfriend or talk to her in front of anybody or talk to her at all. Marcus put out the car, which I thought was a form of a power and control. I would definitely let him know, hey, you probably put the young lady in danger because she's expecting a ride with you, and you didn't put her out of the car, you're gonna make her walk, and obviously that's not a way you treat anyone, a friend, a girlfriend. So Marcus has a lot of work to do as far as a relationship is concerned. And he would be a young man that I would definitely take under my wings and work with him on different levels of how to have a relationship with anyone. So Marcus got a lot of growing up to do.
Great points, Coach Al, and definitely Marcus needs some intervention there, in particularly the anger. What makes him so angry, and to have a conversation and possibly some intervention in working with Marcus, for him to be able to identify, or can he identify what makes him so angry, and it's a great possibility he's displayed the perpetration of an abuser, but he also can be a victim coming from home, living in a volatile situation. So Marcus definitely would need much intervention and prevention, strategies of prevention of him becoming a better person in the way that he treats friends, and in particularly in a relationship.
These are some disclosures of victimization. If a victim comes to you, first thing we want to do is believe them. Stay non-judgmental. Don't jump to give advice or think you know what's best. Do not make it about you or your experiences. Ask open-ended questions and validate their experience and what they are feeling. And sometimes we hear kids with all type of problems, and some of them come to you just need for you to listen. We as mentors, coaches, leaders, we tend to want to jump in and give advice and help right away. Because in a lot of ways, that's who we are. But as a victim that's going through these type of issues, just remember this list of items that we want to do when they come to us. And I think the most important thing, all of it's important, but just believe them, because they're not coming to you just making up stories.
Mm-hmm. Great point. And now we have an example.
We're going to talk about jailing. We all may know a jailing in our group. Jailing, 15-year-old, a kid you know well, seems angry and quiet one day. He asks if he can talk to you privately and tells you his mom and stepdad got into a fight last night. He got in the middle to protect his mom. He got hit in the face and the back. His older sister called the police and his stepdad got arrested. This is not the first time he has witnessed this violence, but this is the first time it escalated to arrest. He is feeling guilty and confused. Now, what might we say to him?
Yeah, thanks. I think, first and foremost, it's a great sign that he's coming to us, right? It's a great sign that he trusts us in this moment to share something so so private and personal and scary. And I would just validate that and say, thank you so much for coming to me. Thank you for sharing this with me. It sounds really scary, and I'm really sorry that this is happening to your mom, and I'm sorry that you got caught in the middle. And I think it's really brave that you were trying to protect your mom, but you definitely didn't deserve to get hit yourself. And you know, he may not have meant to actually hit you. He may have been, you know, targeting your mom, but you know, none of that is okay. But I also understand if you're having a lot of different feelings about this. You know, can you tell me more about how you're feeling today, and maybe how I could help in this moment?
Definitely, Eva. I would also consider asking if he thought he needed medical attention, and also to assure him that it's not his fault. What available resources there might be for his family, his mom, his sister, and himself. For instance, the New Orleans Family Justice Center is here, and I will share that information that he could share with his mom at home.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think being a resource to his mom and to him, I mean, first and foremost to him because he came to you, but to his mom as well. Great points.
Responses to disclosure. What we don't want to do is to tell someone, why didn't you tell me sooner? I can't help you unless you tell me more. I really can't get involved in this. You need to get away from this person and call the police. You need to tell your family. Those are some of the things that we don't want to do if someone feels confident in you to share with you or to disclose to you. What we do want to do is thank them so much for telling us. Tell them how courageous they were to speak up. Ask them how you can help. Do you want to think through some options together? Offer support. And if need be, I think your family would want to know what you've shared with me. How do you feel about talking to them? These are some of the things that we encourage you to do if you should have a disclosure.
Exactly. So another big point when we were talking about disclosure is mandated reporting. Of course, probably as teachers, counselors, mentors, coaches, you may be in a position to be a mandated reporter. And so we just want to support you, although we don't have enough time to cover this topic in detail. It could be a whole training, and is a whole training in and of itself that probably some of you have taken. But just to make it clear that whenever you suspect a child's being physically, sexually abused or neglected, you have a duty to report. You don't need to know exactly. You don't need to investigate. You don't need to feel 100% confident that this is what's happening. But when you suspect it, it is your duty to report. This could include by a caregiver or any other adult. Sexual assault between teens is a bit complicated. The most clear-cut examples for when you need to report is whenever there is no consent. So it doesn't matter the ages of the children. If there's no consent with one party, then it's a sexual assault, right? Or if one party is under 13. Those are the clear-cut cases of sexual assault. The trickier ones are, consensual sex between teenagers. It really depends on the age gap between them. And that, again, is something that you can look up really easily. There are a lot of resources online. There are a lot of trainings about this. We can be a resource to train in the future, but those are the most clear-cut examples. Is you want to look for consent, and of course, if one party is under 13, and then if there's dating violence between teens, and if there's a physical assault, that may be a time to report abuse. So the last scenario, that we were thinking about in terms of your influence is, again, this modeling, right? We've talked about intervening. We've talked about, approaching situations when you suspect something, we've talked about a bunch of different strategies and disclosures, but also just being a model, right? So listening, when you listen deeply to the youth that you work with, you're not only increasing your rapport and being a trusted ear and support for them, you're also modeling for them how important listening is. You're modeling empathy and how they should be listening to others deeply, right? Power sharing, right? So, I think it can be very easy to get into kind of power struggles or power trips with teens. They push our boundaries a lot, they test us a lot. But if you are confident enough to say, hey, I don't need to dominate you, I can share power with you, even though, yes, I am the adult and you are the child at the end of the day, I can share power with you because I'm confident in who I am. That's an incredible model for them. They can see, okay, I don't need to be domineering. I don't need to enforce my will on other people. I can just, by my very presence and my confidence and my collaborative power sharing spirit, work with people. One huge thing you could model that I think people don't teach us how to do is admitting fault and offering a genuine apology when we're wrong, when we've messed up, when we've hurt somebody, especially for men. If there's one skill that, I think we could go back and teach that would be really impactful is the practice of a good, real apology, and explaining to young men in particular, and young people in general, actually, just that admitting you're wrong and apologizing for when you've caused harm does not make you weak. I think it's equated in sort of this tough way, like I can never show that I've been wrong, or that I need to feel bad or be forgiven, because that would admit that I am a weak person. That's just wrong. Vulnerability and authenticity, right? If you show that some of your softer sides, or that it's okay to be vulnerable, then they will say, oh, okay, it's okay for me to show my full self, to be my full self. I can have different emotions and still be, a tough young man. I can be my authentic self in this world, and it's safe, right? You're showing that it's safe for them if you act that way, rather than just showing, kind of the masked version of yourself. Of course, respect for all people, respect for women, respect for people of all gender identities, all sexual orientations, show them that by listening to women's opinions, valuing women's opinions, having friendships with women that are, platonic and not sexual, show that you have that power sharing again, and can have real relationships with women and all people. That shows them, that models for them how they could and should be in the world. And then, of course, thinking about the language that you use when you talk to them, right? Not, for example, not assuming that all of the kids you work with are going to be attracted to the opposite sex. Try to be inclusive around gender identity, try to be inclusive around sexual orientation, be inclusive around race. All of these things will kind of model for them the importance of inclusivity. And that could be a huge, huge help to them.
I'm just going to reemphasize what Eva just went over about modeling. If I go to the next slide. Gentlemen, we on display whether we think we are not. We on display. These kids, they watch everything we do. They watch the way we walk, they watch the way we talk, dress. They can tell you where you got your shoes from, what kind of socks you have on. They can tell by your expression whether you're angry, happy, or sad. So they look at us. And keep in mind, gentlemen, sometimes our young men, we're the only man that they may see for a while. They may go home to just a mother, or to a mother and a grandmother. So sometimes you're the man. You're the man that they see. You're the role model that they see. Not all, but some. So we once again, I just want to be ever mindful of that situation. Thanks, Eve. We can move on.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Trust and resilience. Most common factor among resilient kids is at least one consistent, responsive relationship with an adult. Gentlemen, we just might be that adult. You don't know. We might be that adult. Many teens do not have an adult they trust to be vulnerable with, especially boys. Well, that's what we come in and once again. Let's reach out. Let them know that we're here for them. in case they need a trusted adult. And most people, not just boys, most people will go to heal, go on to heal and thrive after abuse if there is intervention. So just keep these things in mind as we move on and understand, learn our kids and learn why they're here and why we're here.
And at the end of the day, why we do what we do and why you do what you do, it's because this work is about love and equality. It's human connection, and relationships are the foundation of our social structures. When that foundation is broken, it impacts everything. We all deserve to live and love freely, safely, and peacefully. We all have the capacity to change and to heal. We need men who work with youth to lift up this issue and help us to prevent it.
Exactly. And with that, we've come to the end of our presentation. Again, thank you so very much for spending this time with us. We know that you could spend it in a lot of different ways, and we really appreciate you taking the time and thinking through some of these difficult situations. And we really hope that you've learned something, but there's always more. So please reach out, please keep in touch. Those are our email addresses. You can reach out to any one of us or all three of us. As Coach Al said, we have a lot of different trainings we can offer, so that we hope that we can be a resource to you. I'm gonna stop sharing the screen so we can see our faces for just 1 second before we wrap it up. Thank you so much again, and be well.
Thank you, coaches.
Thank you.